A lot of people argue that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has not changed in any major ways over the years. But in reality, there is a lot of stuff that is quite different from what we got initially back in 2008. Let's take a look at the evolution of the MCU over the years. Let's start off with the most natural spot where it all began. The first film in what would become the Marvel Cinematic Universe. X-Men! Yeah, that's technically correct as of the release of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I know some of you have questions and we'll get to that, but that's not what we're talking about. 2008 saw the release of Iron Man, the first solo film starring Robert Downey Jr. as the tech-clad billionaire Tony Stark. This film served as the first proper project for the newly established Marvel Studios, an arm of Marvel Comics that was started in order to maintain all of the media related to their comic properties. The choice to start off with Iron Man was an interesting one, to say the least. While comic fans were pretty familiar with the old shellhead, mainstream audiences, yeah, not so much. However, Marvel was in a tough spot characters-wise. Several years prior to the beginning of production on Iron Man, Marvel had sold off the film rights to many of their most popular characters, including heavy hitters such as Spider-Man, who went to Sony, and the X-Men, who went to 20th Century Fox alongside the Fantastic Four. So, they were stuck working with basically B-tier characters for the most part. But do you know who they still had access to? The vast majority of the main classic lineup of a little team known as the Avengers. And so, Marvel filmed a small scene that they tacked on to the end of Iron Man that teased the formation of this super team, less as a down and out, hey, yeah, we're doing this, and more of a, gee willikers, guys, we really hope this is something that you'd like to see. That would be really swell. And boy, did audiences respond well. So much so that a sequel to Iron Man was put into production, and a scene was filmed featuring Downey Stark and inserted onto the end of The Incredible Hulk. A film often considered the black sheep of the MCU due to its distribution rights being owned by Universal Studios even to this day. Iron Man 2 is noteworthy as being not only the first direct sequel in the franchise, but also the one to feature the first major recasting. Terrence Howard, who played Colonel James Rhodes in Iron Man, was out, with Don Cheadle stepping in to replace him. A change for the better, if you ask me. After The Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2, we also got Thor, a solo flick featuring the hammer-throwing Norse god of thunder, and Captain America, the first Avenger. Thor brought in a side of the universe that audiences had yet to see, the mythical side. While the filmmakers tried to tone down the fantastical elements by explaining all the magic away as just fancy tech, it was still quite the departure from the previous films. Captain America, the movie, did something even more important though, as it gave us the Tesseract. You know, the glowing cube that would not only play a role in the Avengers, but would also be retconned later on to be one of the Infinity Stones, which is kind of important to stuff later on. Both films helped to further flesh out the world of the MCU, and introduced us to all the primary characters who would later in 2012 appear in the Avengers, the first major team-up film, and the proper end of Phase 1. At the end of The Avengers, audiences caught their first glimpse of someone who would go on to dictate the entire course of the MCU for nearly a decade. The Mad Titan himself, Thanos. Now here's the thing about that scene. It was filmed with literally no plan in place for what it meant and what it was building towards. In fact, outside of knowing that they eventually wanted to do a big team-up film, Phase 1 was largely just kind of tossed together without any serious thought to how things were gonna go. It was all just filmmakers flying by the seat of their pants. That all changed in Phase 2. Phase 2 did a lot for the MCU. Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, and Captain America the Winter Soldier all did a lot to build upon many of the themes and ideas introduced within the first phase, refining them and focusing them down, bringing things in line with the new status quo of the franchise. Iron Man 3 probably had the smallest impact of the three films, with the big revelation for Tony at the end being more or less ignored by all future films. Thor the Dark World did a bit to further expand upon the mythical side of the the MCU, including giving us the second Infinity Stone in the form of the Ether. Well, okay, I guess the third, because the Mind Stone was technically in the Avengers, but we didn't know that yet. Captain America: The Winter Soldier did something no MCU film had done yet, introducing a new genre to the franchise. In this case, a spy thriller. Not a traditional one, mind you, as it's all superhero-y, but still it's something. The first non-sequel film of Phase 2 was Guardians of the Galaxy, which is actually kind of a big deal. This film did two big things. First is, of course, the introduction of an entire new team of heroes to the franchise. The other big thing, and perhaps the most important thing, is that this movie gave us our best look at the cosmic side of the universe, something that would play a big part in future films. Oh, and we got the Power Stone too. Yet another Infinity Stone, something worth noting. Avengers: Age of Ultron gave us another team-up film, which is always a good thing, and it did a lot of foreshadowing for the forthcoming third phase. Oh yeah, and it gave us 3 new Avengers: Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and the Vision. Though Quicksilver died before the end of the movie, so I guess we only got 2.5 new Avengers. Anyway, the final film of Phase 2 was Ant-Man, marking the first time that a phase ended not on an Avengers film. This movie is incredibly important in the grand scheme of things, as it introduced the concept of the quantum realm, something that would play a major role in not only Phase 3 via time travel, but also it laid the groundwork for the multiverse, which is the focus of the multiverse saga. So yeah, kind of a big deal. Oh boy, okay, Phase 3 is a bit of a beast, considering the fact that it is nearly double the size of either Phase 1 or 2. There is a lot of this that needs discussing, so we're just gonna kind of blaze through it. This phase is when things really ramped up, moving to a multi-film-a-year release schedule in order to get things out quickly. While Phase 2 is where the proper planning began behind the scenes, there was a lot of ground that needed covering in order to get the story where it needed to be for Infinity War and Endgame to happen. First up was the third Captain America film, Civil War. This film set the tone for the whole phase, as it split the Avengers down the middle due to the ratification of the Sokovia Accords, something that ultimately wound up mattering very little, but at the very least complicated things for a while. This left Earth's mightiest heroes in a weakened spot. However, not everything was bad, as this movie also gave us the introductions of Black Panther and Spider-Man, both of whom had their own films within the phase that gave the characters their own development. Spider-Man here is of particular note, as his very inclusion is kind of astounding when you think about it. It showed that the MCU was big enough of a cultural force, as well as a cash cow, to bring together major film companies in ways unimaginable only a few years before. That's really impressive. Doctor Strange not only brought actual full-on sorcery into the MCU without a tacked-on attempt to explain it with science, yeah, we're looking at you, Thor, but it also gave us another Infinity Stone in the form of the Eye of Agamotto, aka the Time Stone. Oh, and it subtly did some additional multiverse setup. Guardians 2 and Thor Ragnarok both pulled considerable weight in further fleshing out the cosmic side of the MCU, with Ragnarok giving us an actual fun Thor movie, which was a nice change of pace. Then we come to Infinity War. This movie was the beginning of the climax of the Infinity Saga. As Thanos had finally arrived in earnest, he gathered together the stones and left a bloody wake behind him in his pursuit of his ultimate goal, the decimation of half of all life in the universe. Something he ultimately achieved, marking the first time in the franchise where the heroes fully lost in the end. Captain Marvel gave us more cosmic stuff, as well as the first film in the MCU led by a female presenting superhero, which is cool. But the big one here is Ant-Man and the Wasp, which was even more set up for time travel and everything involving the quantum realm, leading us directly into Endgame. The culmination of everything that we had seen up to that point. This is where time travel became a bit of a big deal, as the Avengers used it to gather the Infinity Stones before Thanos did, and retroactively saved the day, returning everyone who had gotten dusted back to life, as well as defeating Thanos. Though a few original Avengers were lost along the way, which is a bit of a bummer, but considering that many actors' contracts were coming to a close, it is completely understandable. So that was the end of the Infinity Saga. There was one more film in Phase 3, Spider-Man: Far From Home, though that was really just an epilogue more than anything. At this point, it's kind of hard to say for sure what parts of Phase 4 are worth talking about. We can pretty safely assume that Loki is important, as it introduced us to our first variant of Kang the Conqueror in the form of He Who Remains, the man who controlled the flow of the one true timeline. Also of note were Multiverse of Madness and Spider-Man No Way Home, as both films dealt with the multiverse in a big way. Hell, No Way Home even did something truly nutty, as it connected the MCU to previously unconnected Marvel-related films. Something that Phase 4 has given us that is a bit of a bigger deal is the inclusion of shows within the release schedule, though it may be something that has led to Phase 4 being seen as a bit scattered and not as tightly integrated as the previous phases. As far as everything else in the future phases, we'll just have to wait and see what comes, I guess.